The text message arrived while my mother was upstairs lighting candles on her own birthday cake. That's the detail I remember most clearly now, not the message itself, not the silence afterward, the candles. Tiny yellow flames trembling in the dining room light while Frank Sinatra played softly through the kitchen speaker, and my father laughed too loudly at something my uncle had said near the bar cart. Then his phone lit up beside my wine glass. Our daughter misses her daddy tonight. I read it once. Then again. And suddenly the room around me changed temperature. My mother was turning 64 upstairs. I was holding the velvet jewelry box containing the necklace I'd bought her after coming home from Kuwait 3 weeks earlier. My father was downstairs refilling bourbon for guests, while another woman texted him about their child. 30 minutes later, somebody rang the front doorbell. And my father went white before he even opened the door. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 38 years old, a major in U.S. Army intelligence, and until that night I thought I understood the shape of disappointment. Turns out I didn't know half of it. My parents lived in the same 2-story brick house outside Indianapolis where I grew up. Same creaky hardwood floors, same yellow porch light, same framed family photos lining the staircase wall like evidence of a life that looked solid from the outside. That Friday night smelled like grilled steak, buttered corn, and my mother's vanilla candles. October rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows, while relatives wandered through the house carrying paper plates and wine glasses. My cousin Brian argued football near the television. Somebody's kid dropped ice in the hallway and got yelled at quietly. Ordinary sounds. That's the thing nobody warns you about family betrayal after 40. It rarely enters your life like a tornado. Usually it slips quietly into rooms already full of normal things. Dad had been acting strange most of the evening. Not dramatic, just distracted. Phone face down beside his drink, taking calls outside on the patio, checking his watch too often. The kind of behavior people explain away because they don't want to start trouble at birthdays. My mother explained it away beautifully. Your father never learned how to relax, she laughed while arranging flowers near the sink. That was Helen Bennett, making excuses for people like it was part of breathing. I stood beside her drying wine glasses while she moved carefully around the kitchen in a navy sweater and silver earrings Dad bought her maybe 15 anniversaries ago. Her hair had gone almost completely gray now, though she still dyed small streaks around the front. I noticed her hands more lately, thinner than they used to be, veins showing beneath the skin. Age arrives quietly on parents, too. One day you realize the people who raised you have started moving slower around stairs. You okay? Mom asked suddenly. I realized I'd been staring into space, holding the same glass for too long. Just tired, I said. She smiled softly. You've always carried stress in your shoulders like your grandfather. Then she squeezed my arm and walked upstairs to check the candles. I watched her disappear toward the second floor while downstairs my father laughed again near the den. Richard Bennett was 67 years old and still somehow filled rooms the same way construction equipment did. Loud voice, heavy footsteps, big opinions about everything. He'd spent 40 years building commercial roofing companies across Indiana, and another 40 believing emotions were things weaker people talked about. When I joined the Army at 22, he called it a phase. When I made captain, he forgot the ceremony date. When I deployed overseas the second time, he told neighbors I worked in military paperwork somewhere. My father respected soldiers in theory, flags, football flyovers, Memorial Day speeches, but a daughter choosing military life, especially intelligence work he didn't fully understand, that made him uncomfortable. Too independent, maybe. Too difficult to explain to his golf buddies. Once after Ranger School graduation, he told me over dinner, "Nobody cares about medals in real life, Claire." I remember staring down at my mashed potatoes, wondering why that sentence hurt more than some things people screamed. Still, part of me kept trying. Funny thing about daughters and fathers. Sometimes you spend decades chasing approval from men who stopped knowing how to give it long ago. Around 8:40 p.m., Dad left his phone on the dining room table while helping my uncle carry folding chairs from the garage. I wasn't snooping, I swear I wasn't. The screen simply lit up beside my hand. Our daughter misses her daddy tonight. No name, just the message preview. For one second I honestly thought maybe I misunderstood it. Maybe somebody meant their actual husband. Maybe it was innocent. Then another message appeared beneath it. She cried after you left. My stomach dropped so hard I actually felt dizzy. Upstairs, my mother started singing softly with the cousins while lighting candles. Happy birthday to you. The phone sat glowing inches from my hand. I picked it up before I could talk myself out of it. The sender was listed as Vanessa Cole, Dad's executive assistant. I'd met her once at a company Christmas dinner 2 years earlier, early 30s maybe, blonde, polite, wedding ring. I opened the messages. That was my mistake. Or maybe my salvation. Because innocent conversations don't look like that. There were hundreds. Photos, hotel reservations, inside jokes, complaints about schedules, discussions about school pickups, messages about a little girl named Emma. And scattered everywhere through the thread our daughter. I sat frozen at the dining room table while voices drifted downstairs and birthday candles flickered upstairs. One message made my throat tighten immediately. She keeps asking why Claire gets him on holidays and she doesn't. I stared at that sentence so long the screen dimmed in my hand. Not because Dad cheated. Because somewhere out there existed another little girl competing with me for a father I'd spent my entire life failing to keep. The kitchen smelled faintly like coffee and birthday cake frosting. Rain ticked against the windows. Frank Sinatra kept singing softly through ceiling speakers while my entire understanding of my family rearranged itself in real time. I took screenshots carefully. Every instinct from 20 years in military intelligence suddenly activated at once. Calm breathing, steady hands, evidence first, emotions later. Then I searched Vanessa online. Married. 1 daughter. 5 years old. My chest tightened. I found her husband's Facebook profile next. Ethan Cole. Auto mechanic outside Carmel. Family photos, fishing trips, birthday parties. A normal-looking Midwestern life quietly sitting beside destruction he didn't know existed yet. I hesitated almost a full minute. Upstairs, everybody started singing happy birthday. My mother laughed. That sound nearly stopped me. But then I looked back down at the messages again. Our daughter misses her daddy tonight. I sent Ethan the screenshots. No explanation. No dramatic speech. Just you deserve the truth. Then I deleted the notification history, locked Dad's phone, and placed it exactly where he'd left it beside his bourbon glass. A few minutes later, Mom came downstairs smiling while everybody clapped around the cake. Dad wrapped one arm around her shoulders for photos like nothing in the world was wrong. I stood near the dining room doorway holding her necklace box while something cold slowly settled inside my chest. Exactly 30 minutes later, the front doorbell rang. Dad looked toward the hallway automatically. And I watched the color drain from his face before he even touched the doorknob. For a few seconds after the doorbell rang, nobody moved. Not my mother carrying the birthday cake knife. Not my uncle reaching for another bourbon. Not me standing near the dining room archway trying to slow my breathing before my heartbeat gave me away. Only my father moved. And even that movement looked wrong somehow. Too stiff. Too fast. Richard Bennett had spent most of my life carrying himself like a man completely certain of his place in every room. Contractors respected him. Church friends admired him. Restaurant hostesses called him Han. He shook hands hard and spoke loudly and tipped 20% minimum because men like my father believed reputation was something you built brick by brick over decades. But when that second doorbell rang, I watched fear crack through him so quickly it almost didn't seem real. "I'll get it," he said. His voice sounded thinner than usual. Mom looked up from the cake candles. Who on earth is showing up this late? Nobody answered her. Rain tapped softly against the windows while Dad crossed the foyer. His shoes sounded heavy against hardwood floors. I noticed ridiculous details suddenly. The wrinkle in the back of his collar, the slight shake in his right hand, the Sinatra playlist still humming quietly from the kitchen speaker. Ordinary life refusing to pause for disaster. Dad opened the front door. A man stood on the porch wearing a dark Carhartt jacket soaked dark at the shoulders from rain. Mid-40s maybe, broad build, tired eyes. He held several printed screenshots folded tightly in one hand. Ethan Cole. For a second, neither man spoke. Then Ethan said quietly, "I think our families need to talk." Not angry. Not shouting. Honestly, that made it worse. Behind me, somebody in the dining room laughed nervously because people can sense tension before they understand it. Mom stepped into the hallway holding the cake server. "Richard," she asked carefully. Dad didn't answer right away. Ethan looked past him into the house. His eyes landed briefly on me, just for half a second. Long enough for me to know he understood exactly who sent the screenshots. Then he looked toward my mother. And suddenly I hated my father in a way I'd never experienced before. Not because he cheated. Because he allowed this man to walk into our home and destroy a 64th birthday party while my mother still had frosting on her hands. Dad stepped outside quickly, trying to shut the door behind him. Ethan stopped it with one palm. "No," he said softly, "we're not doing this privately anymore." The hallway went silent. Mom looked between them slowly. "Richard, who is this?" Dad's jaw tightened immediately. "Nobody you need to worry about." That sentence told her everything. I watched my mother's expression change in real time. Not dramatic, just a quiet collapse around the eyes. Women married 40 years develop instincts sharper than detectives. Ethan finally spoke directly to her. "My name's Ethan Cole," he said carefully. "My wife works for your husband." Nobody moved. Somewhere in the den, the football game continued quietly on television. Announcers discussing field position while an entire marriage split open 15 feet away. Dad rubbed his forehead aggressively. "This is inappropriate." Ethan gave a short laugh without humor. "You had an affair with my wife for 3 years, Richard." The room seemed to physically lose sound. My aunt slowly set her wine glass down on the kitchen island. My cousin stared at the floor immediately. Mom looked at Dad like she no longer recognized the shape of his face. 3 years. Dad started talking fast after that. Defensive, angry, the way guilty men often do when panic outruns strategy. "It's over. It wasn't serious. You shouldn't have come here." Ethan just listened quietly. That calmness unsettled everyone more than yelling would have. Finally, he unfolded the screenshots and handed them directly to my mother. I'll never forget the way her hands trembled holding those papers. Not violently. Just tiny movements. Like cold weather. Mom read silently for maybe 10 seconds before sitting down abruptly on the staircase. "No tears yet. That part comes later sometimes." Dad noticed me standing near the dining room doorway then. Really noticed me. His eyes narrowed slightly. "How did he get those?" I said nothing. Military training teaches you silence can become a weapon if you use it carefully. Ethan answered for me anyway. "Does it matter?" Dad ignored him completely. "Claire." Still nothing. Upstairs, one of the candles finally burned itself out beside the untouched birthday cake. Tiny thread of smoke curling toward the ceiling. Mom spoke so quietly I barely heard her. "You have another child." That question changed the room. Even Dad looked shaken hearing it spoken aloud. Ethan looked toward my mother slowly. "We don't know for certain," he admitted. "But my daughter Emma is 5, and your husband's been paying tuition at her private school for almost 2 years. Mom closed her eyes. My father immediately snapped, "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" Ethan asked. No answer. Rainwater dripped softly from Ethan's jacket onto the entryway rug. Somewhere upstairs a toilet flushed. Ordinary house sounds continuing around emotional collapse. I suddenly understood why betrayal feels so disorienting after middle age. Because everything around it stays normal. The refrigerator still hums. The dishwasher still runs. People still need ice refills and paper towels while their entire lives quietly rearrange themselves. Dad tried pulling Mom into the kitchen to talk privately. She moved away from him immediately. That hurt him, I saw it. Not enough to stop years ago, apparently, but enough now. Family members started disappearing carefully after that. Quiet Midwest retreat behavior, coats collected silently, half-finished drinks abandoned on countertops, nobody wanting front-row seats to another couple's humiliation. Within 20 minutes, the house felt strangely empty. Just me, Mom, Dad, Ethan, and 40 years of marriage bleeding quietly into hardwood floors. Eventually, Ethan and I ended up alone in the kitchen while Dad argued softly with Mom upstairs behind their bedroom door. The kitchen smelled like extinguished birthday candles and cold coffee now. Rain streaked the dark backyard windows. I leaned against the counter, staring at the sink while Ethan stood near the table rubbing exhaustion across his face. "I almost didn't come," he admitted finally. I nodded once. "I know." My daughter's asleep at her grandmother's tonight. His voice tightened slightly. She still thinks Richard's some family friend from work. That sentence landed hard. Ethan laughed bitterly under his breath. Hell of a thing, isn't it? You work 60 hours a week trying to build a decent life and suddenly some guy from corporate's halfway inside your marriage. I looked at him then. He wasn't weak. That mattered somehow. Just tired. Deeply tired. I understood that exhaustion immediately. People think military work prepares you for emotional situations, I said quietly. It doesn't. Ethan gave the smallest nod. Upstairs I heard muffled voices through the floorboards. My father talking louder now, my mother crying softly. That sound hit me harder than I expected. Because growing up my mother protected everybody. Birthdays, Christmases, illnesses. She remembered dentist appointments and favorite casseroles, and which relatives stopped speaking after funerals. She carried emotional weight for the entire family, so naturally nobody noticed until she finally broke under it. Ethan studied me carefully for a second. You already suspected something. I thought about lying. Didn't. No, I admitted, but I knew my father stopped really being present a long time ago. He stared down at the folded screenshots in his hands. Funny thing is, he said quietly, my wife used to say, your father understood her better than anybody. That sentence almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny. Because Richard Bennett barely understood his own daughter. Around 10:15, Mom finally came downstairs alone. Her mascara had smeared slightly beneath one eye. She looked older suddenly, smaller too somehow. She stopped near the kitchen doorway and looked directly at me. Not Dad. Me. Claire, she said softly, did you already know before tonight? The refrigerator motor clicked on behind us. Rain kept falling outside. And for the first time all evening, I honestly didn't know how to answer her. I didn't answer my mother right away. Not because I wanted to protect my father. Honestly, by that point, I wasn't sure I wanted to protect him from anything anymore. I just didn't know how to explain the feeling sitting inside my chest. The strange combination of guilt and anger and relief that comes when a secret finally becomes visible after years of quietly poisoning a family. Mom stood near the kitchen doorway waiting. Her birthday sweater hung loose around her shoulders now, like she suddenly felt cold inside the house she'd lived in for 40 years. I found out tonight, I said carefully, a little before Ethan got here. That hurt her. I saw it immediately. Not because I caused the situation. Deep down, she knew exactly who caused it. But because daughters are still children to their mothers sometimes, even at 38, and realizing your child carried something painful alone for 30 minutes can somehow feel unbearable. Mom nodded once slowly. Then she asked the question I think terrified her most. How long? Neither Ethan nor I answered immediately. Finally, Ethan spoke quietly from the kitchen table. 3 years that I know about. Mom closed her eyes again. Upstairs, I heard my father pacing heavily across the bedroom floor. He wasn't crying. That detail mattered to me more than it should have. I don't know why exactly. Maybe because part of me still wanted evidence that destroying 2 families hurt him as deeply as it hurt everyone else. But Richard Bennett came from a generation of men who turned emotion into irritation before it ever reached the surface. Anger was acceptable. Sadness wasn't. Mom sat carefully at the kitchen table across from Ethan. The birthday cake still sat untouched on the island beside melted candles and paper plates smeared with frosting. Somebody had left half a glass of Pinot Noir near the sink. The dishwasher hummed softly in the background while rain tapped against the dark windows over the backyard. Ordinary house sounds. Everything still felt painfully ordinary. That was the strangest part. The world didn't explode after betrayal. It just kept moving around it. Mom folded her hands together slowly. I think part of me knew she admitted finally. Nobody spoke. She stared down at the table while continuing quietly. Not specifically. Not another child. But... She exhaled shakily. Women know when somebody leaves emotionally before they leave physically. That sentence settled heavily over the kitchen. Ethan leaned back in his chair exhausted. I used to think I was imagining things he admitted. Vanessa guarding her phone, staying late at work, picking fights for no reason. He rubbed both hands across his face. Eventually you start wondering if you're becoming paranoid. Mom nodded immediately. I asked Richard once last spring if there was someone else. She gave a small, humorless laugh. He told me I watched too many crime shows. I looked toward the staircase. My father still hadn't come downstairs. Cowardice changes shape with age too, I guess. Around midnight, Ethan finally left. He stood near the front door, awkwardly holding his wet jacket, while my mother thanked him for telling the truth. That nearly broke me. Not the affair. Not the lies. My mother apologizing to another betrayed spouse on her own birthday. Ethan paused before leaving and looked toward me. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I don't think this is your fault. I almost laughed at that. Because daughters spend their whole lives believing family fractures somehow belong to them. After he left, the house felt cavernous. Too quiet. Football commentators murmured softly from the forgotten television in the den while rainwater dripped steadily outside the gutters. Mom started collecting empty plates automatically like muscle memory had taken over. I helped without speaking. That's another thing people don't understand about emotional devastation at our age. Even while your heart feels shredded open, somebody still has to wrap leftover cake and rinse wine glasses. Around 12:30 a.m., my father finally came downstairs. He looked furious, not ashamed. Furious. Unbelievable, he muttered while grabbing his bourbon glass from the counter. Mom stared at him carefully. That's your first word to us. Dad ignored her completely and looked at me instead. You sent those screenshots. Not a question. I folded my arms slowly. Yes. His jaw tightened hard enough I saw the muscle jump near his temple. You had no right involving yourself in my marriage. That sentence physically stunned me. Not because it was cruel. Because even now, standing inside the wreckage he created, my father still somehow viewed himself as the injured party. Mom actually laughed softly then. A small broken sound. Your marriage, she repeated quietly. Dad rubbed his forehead aggressively. Helen. No. Her voice sharpened suddenly in a way I rarely heard growing up. You don't get to manage this conversation anymore. Silence filled the kitchen. I watched my father carefully then, the same way I used to study nervous sources during intelligence briefings overseas. Tiny physical tells revealing emotional pressure underneath control, rapid blinking, tight shoulders, defensive posture. For the first time in my life, Richard Bennett looked old to me. Not powerful. Not intimidating. Just old and cornered. Mom sat down slowly at the kitchen table again. Is the child yours? Dad looked away immediately. That answer was enough. My stomach turned. Mom covered her mouth with one hand. I realized suddenly that she wasn't just mourning an affair. She was mourning decades, vacations, holidays, retirement plans, the version of her own life she thought existed. Dad finally sat across from us heavily. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. That sentence almost made me angry enough to leave the room. Because betrayal always sounds accidental when guilty people explain it afterward. Like infidelity simply arrived one afternoon like weather. Mom stared at him. How exactly was it supposed to happen? No answer. I stood and walked toward the sink because suddenly I couldn't breathe properly inside that kitchen anymore. Outside rain blurred the backyard lights into watery yellow smears. My old army duffel bag still sat near the mudroom doorway from when I'd arrived home on leave weeks earlier. Funny how life overlaps itself. Military deployments. Birthday dinners. Affairs. Divorce. All sitting together inside one ordinary suburban house. Behind me, Mom asked quietly, "Did you love her?" Dad hesitated too long. That hurt more than if he'd simply said yes. Finally, he answered softly, "I cared about her." Mom nodded once like she expected exactly that answer. Then she asked the question none of us were prepared for. What about Claire? The kitchen went completely silent. I turned slowly from the sink. Mom looked directly at Dad now, eyes red but steady. You spent our daughter's entire life acting emotionally unavailable, she said quietly. Meanwhile, you were out there playing father somewhere else. Dad looked genuinely uncomfortable for the first time all night. Don't do that. Do what? Turn this into something about Claire. I laughed once under my breath before I could stop myself. Because that was the whole problem, wasn't it? Everything always became not about Claire. My graduations. Deployments. Birthdays. Promotions. Dad missed my Ranger School ceremony because he had work. Missed my Pentagon Award dinner because nobody likes those events anyway. But apparently he found time for another little girl's ballet recitals. I knew that before he admitted it. Military intelligence teaches you patterns. After Dad finally went upstairs around 1:15, Mom fell asleep briefly on the living room couch beneath a throw blanket while late-night infomercials flickered silently across the television. I couldn't sleep. So I did what intelligence officers do when emotions become unbearable. I investigated. Dad's home office still smelled faintly like cedar and printer toner. Rain tapped steadily against the windows while I sat at his desk, opening financial files he never expected anyone else to examine closely. Within 40 minutes, the truth started surfacing everywhere. Private school tuition payments, apartment lease transfers, weekend hotel reimbursements hidden inside business expenses. Then I found photographs. Emma, 5 years old, gap-toothed smile, brown curls, standing beside my father holding fishing poles and birthday balloons and ice cream cones. In one photo, she sat on his shoulders at the Indianapolis Zoo while he grinned like the happiest man alive. I stared at that picture so long my eyes started burning. Because my father never once carried me like that. Not once. And suddenly I understood something terrible. I spent 20 years believing my father simply didn't know how to love people deeply. Turns out he just didn't know how to love us. At 2:07 a.m., I found an email confirmation for something called Indiana Business Leadership Foundation Annual Gala. Next Saturday. Guest of honor Richard Bennett. Lifetime Leadership Award. I stared at the screen a long time while rain whispered against the dark windows. Then slowly, for the first time all night, a very calm idea began forming inside my head. The gala took place the following Saturday at the Conrad downtown. Indianapolis looked cold and expensive in the rain that night. Wet streets reflecting yellow traffic lights, valets jogging beneath black umbrellas, women in long dresses hurrying toward revolving doors while men adjusted suit jackets against the wind. I almost turned the car around twice on the drive there. Not because I doubted what my father had done. Because public truth changes things permanently. Once humiliation leaves private spaces, you can never fully gather it back up again. That thought sat heavily in my chest while I parked beside a row of glowing office buildings and watched rain slide slowly down the windshield. At 6:42 p.m., my mother texted me, "Are you sure about tonight?" I stared at the message for a long moment before answering. No, but I'm sure pretending didn't save us either. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No response after that. Inside the hotel ballroom, everything smelled like expensive cologne-polished wood and bourbon. Soft piano drifted through hidden speakers while waiters carried trays of crab cakes between silent auction tables covered in vacation packages and golf memorabilia. The kind of Midwest charity event where wealthy men congratulated each other for donating portions of money they'd made, exploiting people less wealthy than themselves. My father loved events like that. Image mattered deeply to Richard Bennett. Maybe more than family ever did. I arrived wearing full army dress blues. Not for intimidation. Honestly, part of me almost wore civilian clothes instead because military uniforms make people stare, and after 20 years in service I'd grown tired of strangers thanking me for things they didn't actually understand. But in the end I wore them anyway. Not for revenge. For clarity. The daughter my father dismissed most of her life deserved to walk into that ballroom standing fully as herself. Nothing hidden. The elevator doors opened onto the second-floor ballroom lobby around 7:15. Conversations softened immediately when people noticed the uniform. A retired veteran near registration nodded respectfully. Somebody near the bar whispered, "Army Major, I think." I ignored it. Military life teaches you how to move through rooms without absorbing everybody's attention. Dad spotted me almost immediately. His face tightened the second our eyes met. He stood near the center tables laughing with local business owners beneath a massive banner reading Indiana Leadership Foundation. Lifetime Leadership Award. I almost laughed seeing it. Leadership. What a strange word sometimes. Mom arrived 15 minutes later wearing a dark blue dress and silver earrings. She looked beautiful in the way women sometimes do after surviving something painful. fragile but sharper somehow, more awake. Dad walked toward her immediately. "You came," he said quietly. Mom adjusted her purse strap carefully. "It seemed important to you." The sadness in that sentence nearly flattened him. Or maybe that was wishful thinking on my part. Across the ballroom I noticed Ethan standing near the silent auction tables wearing a charcoal suit that fit awkwardly around the shoulders like he didn't wear formal clothes often. He looked exhausted. When our eyes met, he nodded once. Then I saw Vanessa. She stood near the back wall beside the hotel bar wearing a black dress and clutching a wine glass too tightly. Younger than my mother by at least 30 years. Pretty in a tired sort of way, not glamorous, just strained. And suddenly the situation felt less simple than my anger wanted it to. Because affairs destroy everyone involved eventually. Even the people who believed they were choosing love. Dad noticed her at the same moment I did. Panic flashed briefly across his face. That told me immediately he didn't expect her to come. Interesting. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly around 8 o'clock as the award presentations began. People settled into seats. Silverware clinked softly against china, while speakers thanked donors and veterans and local sponsors. Dad sat beside my mother at the front table. The distance between them felt enormous, despite barely 6 inches separating their chairs. I watched him carefully throughout dinner. Sweat near his collar. Constant water drinking. Forced laughter. A man slowly realizing control had already left his hands. The foundation director finally stepped onto the stage around 8:45. And now she announced warmly, "We honor a man whose leadership and commitment to family values helped shape businesses and communities across Indiana for over 40 years. I saw Mom close her eyes briefly. Family values. Jesus Christ. Polite applause filled the ballroom while Dad walked toward the stage, smiling stiffly beneath golden lights. Then everything started unraveling quietly. Not dramatically. That's important. Real reputations rarely explode all at once. Usually they crack slowly beneath silence. Halfway through Dad's acceptance speech, I noticed movement near the ballroom entrance. 2 board members speaking urgently with someone from the foundation. Ethan standing nearby holding a large manila envelope. Vanessa looked terrified now. Dad kept speaking into the microphone. Leadership means integrity. I actually looked away after that. Couldn't do it anymore. The room shifted subtly within minutes, whispers spreading table to table, confused expressions, phones appearing beneath linen napkins. One of the foundation directors approached the stage looking visibly shaken. Dad noticed immediately. His voice faltered slightly. Then Ethan moved. Not aggressively, not emotionally, just calmly. He walked directly toward the stage stairs, carrying the envelope. The ballroom grew quieter. My father stared at him in complete disbelief. "Sir," one board member whispered urgently to Dad near the microphone, "maybe we should." Too late. Vanessa suddenly stood from the back table. "I'm sorry," she said. Not loudly, but loud enough. The entire ballroom froze. She looked toward my mother first, tears already sliding down her face. Then toward Ethan. Then finally my father. I can't keep lying anymore. Nobody moved. Not waiters. Not donors. Not the piano player near the cocktail lounge. The silence felt enormous. Dad stepped down from the podium immediately. "Vanessa." "No," she said shakily, "no more." Ethan handed the envelope calmly to one of the foundation executives. Inside, financial records, hotel receipts, school payments, messages, everything. I watched realization spread slowly across faces around the ballroom. Not scandal excitement. Disappointment. That felt heavier somehow. My father turned toward me then. Really turned toward me. And instantly understood. He walked across the ballroom so fast several guests stepped aside automatically. "Was this your idea?" he demanded quietly. I met his eyes evenly. "Truth wasn't my idea, Dad." His face darkened immediately. "You wanted to humiliate me." "No," I said calmly. "I wanted you to stop humiliating everyone else." That landed harder than yelling would have. People nearby pretended not to listen while listening to every word. Dad lowered his voice further. "You have no understanding of what marriages become after 40 years. I almost laughed. "Neither do you, apparently." His jaw tightened violently. Then finally, after decades of emotional distance and criticism and disappointment, the thing inside me broke loose. Not loudly. Just honestly. "You spent my entire life acting embarrassed of me," I said quietly. "Every promotion, every deployment, every achievement." My throat tightened despite myself. "Meanwhile, you were out building another daughter somewhere else." Dad actually flinched. First genuine reaction all night. Around us, conversations had nearly stopped completely. He rubbed both hands across his face, suddenly looking every bit of 67 years old. "I made mistakes," he muttered. And there it was. The sentence guilty people love most. Mistakes. Like betrayal slips accidentally into calendars beside dentist appointments and oil changes. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, "you made choices for years." That sentence finally shut him up. Behind him, hotel staff quietly approached the stage while foundation executives whispered near the podium. One donor couple gathered their coats immediately. Vanessa cried silently near the ballroom wall while Ethan stood beside her, looking more tired than angry. My mother remained seated through all of it. That image still stays with me sometimes. Helen Bennett sitting alone beneath crystal chandeliers while the life she spent 40 years protecting collapsed quietly around her. Dad looked toward her then. For one second I honestly thought he might walk over and apologize. Instead he said something that permanently changed the way I saw him. "She's replaceable," he muttered bitterly, glancing toward Vanessa. None of this was worth blowing up families over. Vanessa looked like he slapped her. Even Dad realized immediately how terrible it sounded. But it was too late. Because suddenly I understood something clearly. My father didn't destroy people because he loved too deeply. He destroyed them because he viewed people as manageable parts of his own life. Employees. Wives. Daughters. Replaceable. And weirdly enough, that realization freed me. Hotel security managers arrived a few minutes later after foundation directors quietly requested assistance resolving a private issue. Again, no screaming. No dramatic escort. Just soft professional voices guiding my father toward the lobby while guests avoided eye contact. Before leaving, Dad stopped beside me one final time. Rain streaked the tall ballroom windows behind him while soft piano music awkwardly resumed somewhere near the bar. "You think this makes you better than me?" he asked quietly. I looked at him for a long time before answering. "No," I said honestly. "I think it finally makes me stop needing you." That hurt him. I saw it. Then he walked away alone. A year later, my mother's kitchen sounded different. Quieter. Not empty exactly, just rearranged. The old grandfather clock still ticked beside the dining room archway. Coffee still brewed around 6 every morning. Rain still tapped softly against the windows during Indiana spring storms. But the tension that used to sit invisibly inside those walls like trapped smoke had finally begun fading. Funny thing about truth. It destroys things. But sometimes it also lets people breathe again. Mom sold the big house that February. Not because she had to financially. Dad offered a generous settlement during the divorce, probably hoping money might soften guilt. But after 40 years inside those rooms, she said every hallway felt haunted by versions of herself she no longer recognized. So she bought a smaller one-story place 20 minutes north near Geist Reservoir. White shutters, tiny backyard, a kitchen just big enough for 2 people to stand comfortably without bumping elbows. I helped her move on a gray Saturday morning while old country music played softly from her radio and cardboard boxes crowded every room. At one point, she stood holding a stack of framed family photos and laughed quietly to herself. What I asked. Mom smiled sadly. "You spent decades believing houses hold families together." She looked around the empty living room. Turns out people do that part, or they don't. That sentence stayed with me a while. By then, I'd officially retired from active army service after 20 years. Not because of my father. At least not entirely. Truth was somewhere between Kuwait and intelligence briefings and failed relationships, and that ballroom downtown exhaustion finally caught me. The kind that sleep doesn't fix anymore. So I stayed in Indiana. Bought a small townhouse 10 minutes from Mom's place. Started consulting part-time for a defense contractor in Indianapolis, mostly cybersecurity assessments and intelligence training seminars, Boring compared to deployment work, honestly. Peaceful, too. That surprised me more. For the first few months after the gala, people talked constantly. Small-town Midwest gossip spreads faster than wildfire once wealthy families crack publicly. Country club whispers, church speculation, business rumors. Apparently, Dad resigned from 2 charity boards within weeks. The leadership award quietly disappeared from the foundation website altogether. Vanessa left the roofing company by spring. Ethan filed for divorce shortly after Christmas. And my father moved into a luxury condo downtown overlooking the canal, where silence followed him room to room like another person. We texted occasionally. Very occasionally. Mostly practical things. How's your mother? Did you get the insurance paperwork? Happy birthday. Nothing deeper. The strange thing is I didn't hate him anymore. Not truly. Anger burns hot at first after betrayal, but eventually exhaustion replaces it. Then sadness after that. And finally, if you're lucky, clarity. One Sunday afternoon in late June, Dad asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. I almost said no. Then I remembered something my therapist once told me during post-deployment counseling years earlier. Avoidance and peace are not the same thing. So I went. He looked older immediately. That happens quickly after public shame, I think. Men like my father spend entire lives building identities around respect and control. Once both disappear, age catches up fast. We sat inside a small coffee shop overlooking the water while ceiling fans hummed softly overhead and college kids typed on laptops nearby. Dad stirred cream into his coffee for almost 30 seconds before finally speaking. "I hear your mother's gardening again." I nodded, tomatoes mostly. He smiled faintly at that. Mom always loved gardening. Growing up, she used to kneel for hours in old jeans planting flowers while Dad complained about dirt getting tracked through the garage. Funny what memories survive divorce. For a while, we just sat there listening to espresso machines hiss behind the counter. Then Dad finally said it. "I know I failed you." Simple sentence. No excuses attached this time. That mattered. I looked out toward the canal for several seconds before answering. "You didn't fail me all at once." His face tightened slightly. "I know. And honestly, that was enough. Not forgiveness exactly, but truth. Real truth. The kind that arrives late and ugly and human." Dad started seeing Emma regularly after the divorce. I know that because Mom told me quietly one afternoon while we folded laundry together. "You okay with that?" I asked carefully. Mom thought about it a long moment. "That little girl didn't do anything wrong," she said softly. There it was again. Helen Bennett somehow remaining kinder than everybody who hurt her. A few weeks after that, I actually met Emma accidentally at a park near Geist. Dad introduced us awkwardly while the little girl held melting ice cream in both hands and stared up at my army tattoos with fascination. "You were a soldier?" she asked. I smiled slightly, something like that. Dad watched us carefully the entire conversation like he expected anger to explode out of nowhere. But strangely it didn't. Because standing there beside playground swings and screaming children and summer heat, I realized something important. Emma wasn't proof my father loved me less. She was proof he could have loved me better. There's a difference. And weirdly enough, understanding that finally loosened something painful inside me. That fall, Mom celebrated her 65th birthday in the new house. Smaller dinner. Just close family. No grand speeches. No expensive decorations. I grilled steaks outside while old Motown songs played softly through kitchen speakers. Mom laughed with my aunt over wine glasses while rain drifted gently against the patio screens. At one point, she stood beside me frosting her own birthday cake because she refused to let anybody else ruin the edges. I watched her quietly for a second. She looked lighter. Still wounded sometimes, yes. But lighter. Mom noticed me staring and smiled. "What?" I shook my head. Nothing. Then after a moment I added quietly, "You seem happy again." She thought about that carefully before answering. Not happy the same way she admitted, but peaceful maybe. Peaceful maybe. I understood exactly what she meant. Later that night, after everybody left, Mom and I sat together in the kitchen drinking coffee while rain tapped softly against the windows. Same sound as that birthday a year earlier. Completely different life. Mom stirred cream slowly into her mug before asking the question I think she'd carried silently for months. "Do you hate your father?" I looked down at the steam rising from my coffee. Thought about ballroom lights, army promotions, missed graduations, affairs, secrets, little girls needing fathers, and all the years I spent trying to become impressive enough for one emotionally unavailable man to finally see me clearly. Then I answered honestly. "No," I said quietly, but I finally stopped needing him to become someone he never was. Mom nodded slowly like that answer gave her peace too. Outside rain whispered across the dark backyard while warm kitchen light reflected softly against the windows. And for the first time in a very long time, the silence inside our family no longer felt heavy. It just felt quiet. If you've ever loved someone who disappointed you deeply, especially a parent, then you probably understand how complicated healing becomes later in life. Sometimes closure doesn't arrive through revenge or screaming or dramatic endings. Sometimes it arrives quietly one ordinary evening when you realize another person's failure no longer defines your worth. If this story stayed with you tonight, I'd truly love to hear where you're watching from and what part touched you most. And if you enjoy stories about family resilience, heartbreak, and healing later in life, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. There are so many more stories still waiting to be told. "Don't call me right now. I'm in a meeting." My father's voice came through sharp, impatient, like I was interrupting something important, something that couldn't wait. I stood there for a second, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the empty line after he hung up. Then I lowered it slowly, my fingers tightening just enough to feel the edge of the case against my palm. Because 10 feet in front of me, beneath the soft gold light of the hotel lobby, I was watching him walk in, with his hand resting on another woman's back. Not awkward, not hesitant, familiar. And suddenly the lie didn't need explaining anymore. The lobby of the Marriott in Scottsdale was the kind of place designed to make everything feel calm, expensive, controlled. Polished marble floors, tall glass windows that pulled the late afternoon sun inside and softened it into something almost forgiving. There was a quiet hum, rolling suitcases, low voices, the distant chime of the elevator. None of it touched me. I stood near a column, half-shadowed, my uniform jacket folded over my arm instead of on my shoulders. I'd changed before coming in civilian clothes, neutral, forgettable. Habit. In the military, you learn quickly when to be seen, and when not to be. My mother stood a few feet behind me. I didn't turn around, but I could feel her there, still, silent. We hadn't planned to speak. We didn't need to. My father approached the front desk with the same easy confidence I'd seen my entire life. Shoulders back, chin level, the kind of man people trusted without asking questions. He leaned slightly toward the receptionist, smiling in that familiar, practiced way, the one that used to make rooms open for him. The woman beside him laughed at something he said. It was a little too loud for the space, like she was trying to match his energy and overshot it. Younger than my mother. Younger than him by at least 20 years. Her hand brushed his arm as she spoke. He didn't move away. That was the detail that settled it. Not the hotel, not the lie. The comfort. The way they moved around each other like this wasn't new. I exhaled slowly, steady, controlled. No rush of anger, no surge of disbelief. That part had already passed weeks ago, maybe longer. What I felt now was something else. Clarity. Behind me, I heard the faint shift of fabric. My mother adjusting her stance, maybe, or maybe just grounding herself the way I was. She had asked me to come with her, not to confront him, not to make a scene, just to see. "I don't need proof anymore," she had said that morning, her voice calm in a way that made me pay attention. "I just need to know if I'm done pretending." So we came. And now we knew. At the counter, my father handed over a credit card. I didn't need to see it closely to recognize it. We'd used that same card last Christmas. Same one my mother used for groceries, for birthdays, for the quiet, ordinary things that built a life. He didn't hesitate, didn't glance around, didn't check his surroundings. Why would he? In his version of reality, I was back on base. My mother was probably at home. And this was separate, contained, safe. The receptionist typed something into her computer, then smiled up at him. Checking in. "Yes," he said easily. "Reservation under Carter." Carter. The name landed differently in my chest than I expected. Not painful, just distant, like something I used to belong to. I shifted my weight slightly, just enough to keep them in view without drawing attention. Years of training made the movement instinctive. Observe, assess, stay still. The woman Emily, I would later confirm, leaned closer to him as the receptionist spoke again. Her voice dropped softer now, like they were already stepping into a more private world. I didn't catch the words. I didn't need to. I pulled my phone from my bag and glanced at the call log. His name still sat at the top, less than a minute ago. "I'm in a meeting." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was so simple, so predictable. For years, my father had been the kind of man who explained everything. Detailed, precise. If he was late, there was a reason. If something didn't add up, he'd walk you through it until it did. Lately, it had changed. Short answers, delayed responses, conversations that ended just a little too quickly. At first, I told myself it was stress, work, age. Then I started noticing patterns. And once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. The receptionist reached for 2 key cards and placed them neatly on the counter. My father picked them up, his hand brushing hers in a brief, polite gesture, before he turned slightly toward the woman beside him. His hand returned to her lower back. Again natural, unthinking. Like it belonged there. I felt something shift inside me then. Not a break. That had happened earlier, quietly over time. This was different. This was the moment something ended. They turned toward the elevators, walking side by side, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Neither of them looked around. Not once. The doors slid open with a soft chime. They stepped inside. And then they were gone. The lobby returned to itself almost immediately. A man on his laptop near the corner. A couple checking in behind where my father had just stood. The low music overhead steady and indifferent. Ordinary. That was what struck me most. How ordinary everything felt when nothing was. I stood there for a few seconds longer, letting the moment settle, not pushing it away, not rushing past it, just letting it exist. Then I turned. My mother met my eyes. There were no tears, no visible anger. Just a kind of quiet that I had never seen in her before, not empty, just resolved. "Well," she said softly. That was it. No accusation, no question. Just acknowledgement. I nodded once, yeah. We didn't hug, didn't say anything else, we didn't need to. After 30 years of marriage, whatever needed to be understood between them already was. I glanced back toward the front desk. The receptionist was still there, organizing something behind the counter. In my bag, I could feel the edge of the envelope, thick, sealed, prepared. We hadn't come here by accident. A week earlier, my mother had sat across from a lawyer in a quiet office and said the words out loud for the first time. Not with anger, not with hesitation, just clarity. "I'm done." Papers were drafted, documents gathered, accounts reviewed. Everything handled the way things should be handled when you're no longer reacting, but deciding. I stepped toward the front desk, slowly aware of my own breathing, steady and controlled. My mother followed just a step behind. The receptionist looked up as I approached. There was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She remembered me from earlier. "Hi," I said, offering a small, polite smile. "We spoke on the phone." She nodded, glancing briefly between me and my mother. "Yes, I remember." I reached into my bag and placed the envelope gently on the counter. "I'd like you to give this to Mr. Carter when he checks out." She hesitated. Just for a moment. Her eyes dropped to the envelope, then lifted back to my face, searching for something, doubt maybe. "There won't be a scene," I added quietly. "He won't even know until he's leaving." Another pause, a human one. Then she nodded. "All right. Thank you." I stepped back, giving her space, giving the moment room to settle into something final. As we turned toward the exit, I felt it again, that same steady, unfamiliar feeling from before. Not relief, not satisfaction. Control. For the first time in a long time, we weren't waiting for him to decide what happened next. We already had. Outside, the Arizona heat hit my skin dry and immediate. The sunlight felt sharper now, less forgiving. Real. I didn't look back. We didn't talk about revenge. Not once. If you had asked my mother what she was doing, she wouldn't have used that word. She would have said something simpler, something quieter. "I'm getting my life in order." And that's exactly what it looked like. No dramatic confrontations, no late-night arguments, no accusations thrown across the dinner table. From the outside, nothing changed. My father still left early for work. My mother still made coffee in the mornings. The house still carried the same rhythm it always had. But underneath that rhythm, everything was shifting. It started with paperwork. One afternoon while my father was at work, my mother sat at the dining table with a small stack of documents spread out neatly in front of her. Bank statements, credit card summaries, insurance papers, the kind of things people only organize when something important is coming. I sat across from her, not speaking, just watching the way she moved, careful, methodical, not rushed. "You don't have to do this alone," I said after a while. She glanced up, a faint smile touching her lips. "I know." But she kept going. There was something about that moment that stayed with me, not because of what she was doing, but because of how she was doing it. There was no anger in her movements, no visible resentment, just focus. Control. A few days later, she met with a lawyer in Mesa. She didn't tell my father. She didn't tell anyone else either, just me. The first thing she asked me, my mother said that evening as we sat in the living room, was whether I wanted to fight or whether I wanted to finish. And I asked. She leaned back slightly, her hands folded loosely in her lap. I told her I didn't want a scene. That sounded like her. "I just want it to be clear," she added. Clear. That word became the foundation of everything that followed. The lawyer explained the process: community property laws, asset division timelines. It was practical, structured, almost clinical. My mother listened to all of it without interruption. When it was over, she signed the initial documents with the same steady hand she used for everything else. No hesitation. After that, things moved quietly but quickly. Accounts were reviewed, copies were made, dates were noted. And then there was the envelope. It sat on the kitchen counter the first time I noticed it. Thick, sealed, unassuming. "What's in it?" I asked. "Everything he needs to know," she replied. She didn't elaborate, she didn't have to. A few nights later, I asked her something I hadn't been able to shake. "Why the hotel?" She looked at me for a moment, considering the question. "Because that's where he thinks he's in control," she said. I frowned slightly. "He's careful at home," she continued. "Measured. He knows how to manage what people see. But out there," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "he's comfortable. And comfortable people don't hide as well as they think they do." That made sense. In the military, we were taught something similar. Patterns reveal truth, and people only maintain discipline for so long before they slip into habit. The hotel wasn't random. It was predictable. We didn't need to track him. We didn't need to follow him. All we had to do was wait for him to step into the version of his life he thought no one else could see. And then be there first. The day we drove to Scottsdale, neither of us said much. The highway stretched out ahead of us, sun reflecting off the asphalt in that dry Arizona way that made everything feel a little too bright. My mother kept both hands on the wheel, her posture steady, her expression neutral. "You sure about this?" I asked at one point. She didn't answer right away. "Yes," she said finally. No doubt, no hesitation. Just certainty. We arrived at the hotel earlier than he did. That was intentional. My mother had called ahead, spoken to the receptionist, explained just enough to make the request without turning it into something dramatic. "I don't want a scene," she had said. That part was important. The receptionist had hesitated, of course. It wasn't a typical request, but there was something in my mother's tone, calm, composed, unwavering, that made people listen. "We'll do what we can," the woman had replied. That was all we needed. We waited in the lobby after that. Not hiding exactly, just present. Watching. Time passed in a way that felt both slow and precise. The kind of waiting where every detail becomes sharper. The sound of footsteps, the hum of conversation, the subtle shift of light across the floor. When he finally walked in, it wasn't a surprise. It was confirmation. Everything after that moved exactly as planned. We didn't approach him, we didn't interrupt, we didn't make ourselves known. We let him check in. We let him believe his version of reality was intact. Because the plan was never to confront him in that moment. It was to let him carry the truth with him. To place it in his hands when he thought he was leaving untouched. Back in the present, after we handed the envelope to the receptionist, my mother and I walked out of the hotel side by side. Neither of us spoke until we reached the car. She unlocked it, then paused with her hand on the door. For a long time, she said quietly, "I thought I was waiting for him to choose." I leaned against the passenger side listening. To choose us, to choose this life. She shook her head slightly, but he already did. There was no bitterness in her voice. Just understanding. I just didn't want to admit it. I nodded once. That's the hardest part, I said. She looked at me, a small, almost tired smile forming. Not anymore. We got into the car after that, the air inside still warm from the sun. As she started the engine, I glanced back once, just once, toward the entrance of the hotel. People moved in and out like nothing had changed. Because for them, nothing had. But for us, everything had already shifted. We weren't reacting anymore. We weren't guessing. We weren't waiting. We had seen the truth. We had prepared for it. And now, we were simply letting it unfold. When he checked out later that evening, the lobby looked exactly the same. Same soft lighting, same quiet music, same polite rhythm of people moving in and out of a place that never really changed. The difference was him. I didn't see it happen. Not directly, but I could picture it clearly enough the moment the receptionist slid the envelope across the counter with a neutral smile, the way he would have taken it without thinking, assuming it was a receipt or a copy of something routine. And then, the pause. The slight shift in his posture as he realized the weight of it wasn't paper thin. The hesitation before opening it. And then the stillness that follows when something you didn't expect suddenly makes perfect sense. He wouldn't have made a scene. That wasn't who he was. Not in public. Not in a place where people could see. But something would have shown. A tightening in his jaw. A change in his breathing. That small involuntary reaction you can't control when your version of reality breaks open just enough to let the truth in. By the time he walked out of that hotel, he already knew. And for the first time, he wasn't the one in control of the narrative. The drive home from Scottsdale to Mesa usually takes about 20 minutes. That night, I imagine it felt shorter. Not because he was calm, but because when something urgent settles into your mind, everything else disappears. Traffic, distance, time. It all collapses into a single thought. How do I fix this? By the time he pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the way he had left it that morning. Lights on in the kitchen, curtains slightly open, the familiar ordinary image of a life still in place. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that inside everything had already changed. My mother and I were sitting at the kitchen table when the front door opened. We didn't turn right away. We let him walk in. Footsteps faster than usual, slightly uneven, the sound of the door closing harder than necessary. Linda. His voice carried something I hadn't heard in a long time, not authority, not control. Uncertainty. My mother looked up first, not sharply, not dramatically, just steadily. "I'm here," she said. He stepped into the kitchen a moment later. I watched his face carefully. Years of training had taught me to read people, not just what they said, but what they tried to hide. His eyes moved quickly, taking in the scene. My mother at the table, me sitting beside her, the two of us together. Then the envelope in his hand. That's when the color in his face shifted. Not completely gone, not yet, but enough. "What is this?" he asked, holding it slightly up like the answer might be written on the outside instead of inside. My mother didn't respond immediately. She folded her hands in front of her, resting them lightly on the table. "It's exactly what it looks like," she said. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough for the meaning to land. "Divorce papers," he said, the word catching slightly in his throat. "Yes." He let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. This is insane." I didn't move, didn't lean forward, just watched. "You had someone hand me divorce papers at a hotel," he continued, his voice rising slightly. "At a hotel." "It was private," my mother replied calmly. "No one made a scene." "That's not the point," he snapped. I spoke then. "It is the point." His eyes snapped toward me. "Excuse me." I held his gaze evenly. "You didn't want a scene, neither did we." Silence followed. He looked between us again, searching for something: confusion, doubt, hesitation. There wasn't any. "You're overreacting," he said finally, his tone shifting, trying to regain footing. "You don't have all the information." My mother tilted her head slightly. "Then give it to me." Another pause. This one longer. Because that's the problem with lies. They need details. And when the moment comes to provide them, there's usually nothing left. "It's not what you think," he said softer now. I almost smiled, not out of amusement but recognition. "It's exactly what we think," I replied. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the kitchen like movement might help him find something to say. "She works with me," he said quickly. "It was a work trip, we had meetings." In a hotel room, I asked, my tone still calm. He stopped. "That's not—" "You told Mom you were in a meeting?" I continued, not raising my voice. "You were." He stared at me. "Just not the kind you thought you'd have to answer for." The words landed cleanly. No anger, no accusation. Just truth. He exhaled sharply, his shoulders dropping a fraction. Not enough for most people to notice. But I did. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said, finally, his voice quieter now. My mother nodded once. "I believe that," she said. For a second, something like hope flickered across his face. "But you did," she added. And just like that, it was gone. We sat there in the quiet for a moment, the weight of everything settling into the space between us. He looked down at the envelope again, then back at my mother. "You're really doing this?" "Yes." "Over one mistake." That word one hung in the air. My mother glanced at me briefly, then back at him. "This didn't start at that hotel," she said. "That was just where it ended." He didn't respond. Didn't argue. Because deep down, he knew she was right. His gaze shifted around the kitchen like he was seeing it for the first time. The table, the counter, the small details of a life he had assumed would still be there no matter what he did. "What happens now?" he asked. It was the first honest question he had asked since walking in. My mother answered simply, "We move forward." "With lawyers?" "Yes." "And that's it," he pressed. "You just walk away from 32 years. She looked down at her hands for a moment, then back up at him. "I walked away from it a while ago," she said quietly. That was the moment his composure broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just visibly. The realization that this wasn't a reaction. It was a decision. I stood then, pushing my chair back slowly. He turned toward me, his expression shifting again, uncertain, searching. "You knew about this?" he asked. "Yes." "And you didn't say anything?" I met his eyes steady. "I was waiting for you to tell the truth." He looked away first. "That told me everything I needed to know." I picked up my bag from the counter. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To stay with Carol for a few days," my mother replied before I could answer. He nodded slowly, like he had expected that, or maybe like he was trying to catch up to a reality that had already moved past him. I paused near the doorway, then spoke one last time. "You said you were in a meeting," I said. He didn't respond. "You were," I continued. "You just didn't realize what was being decided." And then I walked out. No shouting, no slammed doors, just the quiet sound of something ending, exactly the way it had been breaking all along. 8 months later, the mornings felt different. Not better in the way people expect, not brighter, not easier, but clearer. The kind of clear that comes when something stops pressing against you from the inside. My mother moved into a smaller place on the east side of Mesa. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a small patio that caught the morning sun just right. It wasn't the house I grew up in. It didn't have the same echoes, the same worn-in corners, the same history layered into every room. But it was quiet. And it was hers. The divorce itself wasn't dramatic. Arizona doesn't allow for much drama in that regard. Community property. Everything split down the middle, paperwork processed with a kind of efficiency that doesn't leave much room for emotion. There were meetings, signatures, conversations that stayed polite on the surface and avoided anything too personal underneath. My father didn't fight it, not the way I thought he might. Maybe he knew there wasn't much left to argue, or maybe for the first time in a long time he understood that control wasn't something he could reclaim by talking his way through it. We saw him a few times during the process. Short interactions, practical, focused on logistics. He looked different. Not physically, not in any obvious way, but there was something missing from the way he carried himself. That quiet certainty he used to have, the sense that he knew exactly how things would unfold. That was gone. In its place was something less defined. Hesitation, maybe, or awareness. One afternoon near the end of everything, we sat across from him in a conference room, neutral space, beige walls, a long table dividing the room into clean halves. He looked at my mother for a long moment before speaking. "I never thought it would end like this," he said. She nodded. "Neither did I." That was it. No blame, no raised voices, just two people acknowledging something that had already been over long before either of them said it out loud. After the divorce was finalized, my mother took a few weeks to settle into her new place. At first, the silence felt unfamiliar, not heavy, just different. She had spent so many years adjusting to someone else's presence that being alone again felt like learning a new rhythm. Simple things took getting used to. Cooking, for one. Waking up in a bed that didn't shift beside her. Leaving the television off because there was no one else in the room to fill the space. But slowly those things changed. They stopped feeling empty. They started feeling peaceful. She picked up part-time work at a dental office nearby. Nothing demanding. Just enough to create structure to interact with people, to remind herself that her life extended beyond the roles she had carried for so long. The first day she went back, she called me afterward. "I forgot what it feels like," she said. "What?" "To just be somewhere without thinking about anyone else." There was a lightness in her voice I hadn't heard in years. I returned to base not long after that. My work resumed its usual pace: early mornings, structured days, the kind of environment where clarity isn't optional. In the military, you don't get to ignore what's in front of you. You assess it, you respond to it, and you move forward. That's what this felt like. Not a victory, not a loss. Just forward. Sometimes late at night, when everything settled and the noise of the day faded, I thought about that moment in the hotel lobby. The way he had walked in, the way he had smiled, the ease in his movements, like he was stepping into a life he believed was separate from the one he had built. For a long time I tried to understand it. Not to excuse it, just to place it somewhere that made sense. But eventually I stopped trying. Because not everything needs to be understood in order to be accepted. And acceptance doesn't mean approval. It just means you stop waiting for something to change. My mother still calls me every few days. Sometimes we talk about practical things, appointments, work, the small details that fill a life. Sometimes we don't talk about anything at all. We just stay on the line, sharing the quiet in a way that feels enough. Once a few weeks ago, she asked me something that stayed with me. "Do you think we were too calm about it?" I considered the question. "No," I said finally, "I think we were clear." She was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," she said softly, "I think so too." Clarity doesn't always look like strength. It doesn't always come with loud decisions or visible change. Sometimes it looks like silence, like restraint, like choosing not to react in the ways people expect. But that doesn't make it weak. If anything, it makes it final. These days, her mornings start the same way. Coffee on the patio, the sun coming up over the rooftops, a small table just big enough for a mug and a book. Out of habit, she told me once, she still pours 2 cups sometimes. She'll stand there for a second looking at both of them. Then she'll smile a little, pour one back into the pot and sit down. "Because I only need one now," she said. There was no sadness in it. Just truth. As for my father, we don't talk much, not out of anger, not out of punishment, just distance. Some things don't end with a single moment. They fade, gradually, until what's left is something quieter, more defined. He still has his life, his work, whatever version of things he chose to step into. But it exists without us now. And that was his decision. We didn't take anything from him. We just stopped protecting the version of him that didn't exist anymore. If you've ever found yourself holding on to something out of habit, out of history, out of the hope that it might return to what it used to be, you already know how hard it is to let go. But there's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when you realize you're not holding it anymore. You're just standing there. And for the first time in a long time, you're standing on your own. If this story stayed with you, I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Have you ever reached a point where silence said more than words ever could? Let me know in the comments below and tell me where you're watching from. We share stories like this every day, stories that remind us what it means to choose ourselves, even when it's hard. So if you're still here, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Let's keep walking this path together.